I am so excited to learn from you in all different ways. Can you tell me your name and a little bit of your background?
Yeah, and thank you for having me, by the way. My name is Toni Bark, and I'm a physician, but that doesn't really explain my background because my background is quite eclectic, and I've always been very health conscious and interested in health, not just medicine. But my academic background is I went to medical school, I did residency, I have a master's in medical science, disaster planning. But what you don't know is that I was raised in a family that was very health conscious, and I've been working out in health conscious and focused on my food since I was a child. And my food has evolved, as has my workout schedule and the things that I do, kind of the biohacking tricks that I do to improve mitochondrial function, autonomic function, which I believe is like the basis of, health and longevity.
So tell me a little bit more about that, because so many people have heard about the mitochondria, and we know, okay, yes, it's part of our cells, it's an organelle, they're organelles in our cells, but what does it mean to you?
It's separate DNA from our own DNA, which is fascinating all in of itself. It's directly from our mothers, so it's linked down your maternal line, and it's cloned, basically, and it was theoretically bacterium that we incorporated. So that's fascinating, but that's not why I'm doing this. The mitochondria is the fuel cell. It's the cell, it's part of the cell that is the engine. Mitochondria, actually all mitochondria, can run or create energy, or ATP, which is the energy for the cell to respire and to be alive and to be able to do its function. And mitochondria can use glucose, or they can use fats. And in some cells, it's going to be in the form of free fatty acids, and in some cells, it's going to be in the form of ketones. And that is the difference. Whichever fuel you're using is going to make a big impact on how well the mitochondria are going to last and how well they're going to function, because glucose comes with 4 oxygen species attached to it. And oxygen, while we need it, also creates reactive oxygen species, which is, it oxidizes things in the mitochondria. Whereas one molecule of fat will give you almost twice as much ATP as the glucose molecule with half the reactive oxygen species, because there's 2 oxygen molecules on a fat molecule. There's 2 oxygens attached to a fat molecule, not 4. So it's a much more efficient fuel in terms of, less steps going into the mitochondria to be used than glucose, and then you get more fuel and less byproduct, so less waste, and the waste is harmful to the mitochondria.
How many people are using this information and providing the mitochondria with fat, with this preferred fuel?
I would say all the endurance athletes, like most of the endurance athletes, most of the top athletes that are into being in peak performance work, and I'm talking about really elite athletes, most of them are onto the keto thing because they know that they're going to perform better. They're never going to hit a wall. You can only store 2,000 calories of glycogen. I don't care who you are. That's all you're storing. So if you're 150 pounds and you're running a marathon, by mile 15 or 18, you've hit a wall. And so if you're an elite athlete, you're going to want to be in your peak performance. And so most of those guys are doing keto at this point. Then you've got like the biohackers around, people who just want to be healthy and they like the idea of like not going to the doctor and kind of bucking the mainstream, which, the mainstream tells you to have 6 to 8 servings of whole grains.
Right.
Oh my God, we'd all be diabetic if everybody listened to that. And then you've got a small group of doctors and nutritionists who are, willing to look into this and say out loud, this is really where we need to go. What we've been thinking about fat is all wrong. And, a calorie is not a calorie. You hear a lot of endocrinologists say a calorie is a calorie. It's not true. So it's a small group, I would say, of physicians. It's a small group of scientists. It's a growing group. But I have been attacked on social media by mainstream physicians and who I believe are probably have an agenda, saying, they try to scare people out of keto. Like, it's, you wear the fat you eat, and it's, kidney damage, and you get a fatty liver. All those are wrong. Absolutely, completely wrong. So once you're using fat as fuel, it's a whole different thing. That's a whole different thing. And you don't wear the fat you eat, because fat, the fat you wear is triglycerides. And triglycerides, while they can be made from almost any macronutrient, they're mostly made by glucose, excessive glucose, right? They can be made by excessive proteins. And if you're really eating way too much fat, more than calories than you could ever use, you're going to start converting that to glucose and then to triglycerides too. But like if everyone was keto a few months out of the year, like forget about being keto their whole life or
Right.
all the time, but if they were keto a few months out of the year or a few weeks out of every month, we would have disease rates plummeting. The healthcare system would start collapsing because this healthcare system relies on people getting sicker and sicker, and it is the fastest growing industry in the world, the American healthcare industry. In 3 weeks of ketosis, my patients who were doing it for other reasons, their high blood pressure is gone. I reverse insulin-resistant diabetes. Patients that are on insulin, we get them off insulin and non-diabetic within a month. Within a month.
Wow.
They've been using insulin for years. This isn't the autoimmune type, right?
Right.
This is the more common type that we're seeing now. Dementia, foggy brain, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, all these autoimmune diseases, chronic microglial activation from vaccine injury and kids on the spectrum and ADD. So it's not just cancer. And of course, seizures. I mean, this is where, when I trained as a pediatrician, I did pediatrics and rehab. And in pediatrics, back in the 80s, I mean, this diet had been used for decades already. For
Decades and decades,
decades
right?
and decades, since the early 1900s for
Yeah.
seizure control. So it's a threat to the healthcare system. It's an industry disruptor. If everyone was doing this and knew this would be a major industry disruptor to pharma and to big food for some reasons, because of some of the foods that people eat. It's keeping them from being able to go into ketosis because of the way it affects our bowel flora, like Roundup, certain pesticides, right? So it would be an industry disruptor if everybody had this knowledge. They wouldn't need to go to their doctor. They wouldn't need prescription meds. They'd be reversing their cancer without all the chemo and all the radiation and all the surgeries, because they understand it's the mitochondria that's damaged and they need to focus on their mitochondria. So it's such a big industry disruptor that information is not out there, and there's counter information for a reason, I believe. And I think the evidence of that is having physicians in Australia having their license suspended for recommending high-fat diets. Now, if they recommend high-carb diets, they're not getting their license suspended. You know that.
Why do you think that fat has been the enemy for so many years?
People in the sugar industry, like the conglomerate, were paying people, academics and a scientist at the CDC, to keep the story going, that fat is the problem and not sugar. I remember in the 70s and 80s hearing Indian doctors saying, sugar is what causes heart disease. It's not fat. And I remember thinking, wow. And there were academics being paid to write these articles. So people were all being told by the CDC.
So why are there millions of people all over the internet asking each other questions, trying to understand this idea that fat may not actually be the culprit?
So a lot of people don't like to think that the system is rigged. There's some cognitive dissonance, that's one thing. Two, we've been ingrained to think that fat is bad and clogs the arteries, and that as long as you count your calories, you can have sugar. That's been the mentality, and it's a dogma, and it's hard for people to break it. But the other thing is that, remember, if you're a glucose burner, you're addicted. I mean, you're an addict. People don't realize this. They think I'm crazy when I say that, but you're an addict, because when that blood glucose drops and you're not fat adapted, you don't feel well. Like, I got to eat because I'm going to get irritable. You hear this all the time. I remember feeling like that. I remember feeling like that all the time. It was either from coffee or carbohydrates that made me feel that way. And that is a common story that I hear, because people aren't fat adapted. And we're meant to be fat adapted.
Are we?
Yes. I mean, so think about it. If it takes 2 less steps to get free fatty acids or ketones into the cell to the mitochondria, and it produces less byproduct, and you get more energy from it, doesn't that tell you that that's really the primary fuel, not the secondary fuel? It's not the alternate fuel. Sugar's the alternate fuel. So plants, yes, they create glucose and they utilize glucose. But animals, all use fats, and most are fat adapted all the time and should be. Most in the wild are fat adapted. And this movement that's happening is happening in the veterinary movement.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So there are now companies that deliver grass-fed raw meats for your animals because the animal with the number one highest rate of cancer on the planet are dogs. Mm-hmm. Cats are close behind, but dogs have the highest rates. And dogs are scavengers, and they actually can go days without eating. They're meant to be in intermittent ketosis. And they can have some carbohydrate, but even organic meat-based dog food that's in a can or the kibble is at least 40 to 60% carbohydrate. It shouldn't be more than 10 or 15 at the most, and those carbohydrates should be coming from like raw vegetables. Cats are obligatory carnivores, and they actually do need to eat on a regular basis, and they should really only be eating organ meat and meats, and raw.
So you've been using a ketogenic diet with your patients
Yes.
for how many
Probably
years now?
since 2011. Mm-hmm. And then I went into ketosis for the first time in 2012.
Okay.
And stayed into it for a few months. I didn't think I was going to stay in it indefinitely. I just was like, I'm going to be keto for a few months, and I loved it. And then I would go back and forth, and then for the last 3.5 years, I've been in ketosis solid. Now, I can throw myself out when I do high-intensity workouts. That's normal.
So talk to us a little bit about this. So you're in ketosis all of the time, most of the time.
Right.
And when you throw yourself out, can you talk about what the effect is on your body? Is there an effect? How does that work?
When you do high intensity, so I do all kinds of workouts. I do cold water immersion and cold water swimming. Then you really glucose burn. It just revs up the fat burning and you really drop your glucose levels. But when you do high intensity workout, which I do hot yoga and hot Pilates, you're creating some stress on your system. And so you can stimulate some cortisol production. And when you do that, your gluconeogenesis turns on. Now, some of it is necessary if you're building muscle, because when your body feels that it's breaking down enough muscle and it needs to repair, you have to affect the AMPK and also something called mTOR. And mTOR is really reduced down to almost nothing or very low levels when you're in ketosis, but you need mTOR for muscle building. So when your body's perceiving you to be working so hard with a muscular workout or such high intensity, you're going to turn those things on, and probably, I don't know which comes first, but you create some gluconeogenesis, which is new, and that word just means new creation of glucose. And it can be from stored glycogen, and it can be from protein you've eaten, but you're going to turn that system on temporarily. And so I can come back from a high intensity workout, whether it's boxing on a hot day or hot yoga or hot Pilates, and see that my ketones are just below the nutritional ketosis level that I normally am at.
And where do you like to
So
stay
I
normally?
use my breath, the breathalyzer. I use a breath meter for my acetone levels, and usually 5 and above is ketosis, and I'm usually anywhere from 5 to 6.5, but usually 5.8. I'm usually right around there. But when I come back from a high intensity workout, I'm about 4.8. And then a few hours later, I'm right back.
Right back.
Right back. When I come back from cold water swimming, I could go up to 6.7. And the interesting thing is that when I fat fast, I can get up to 6.7, 6.8. When I water fast, I'm back down in the low 5s.
Okay, can you talk about a fat fast?
Yes.
And a water fast?
So you can mimic water fasting closely by having I'll have a few handfuls of macadamia nuts, or I'll put coconut oil in my tea in the morning, and I'll keep my calories under 500 for the day. And I'll get very, yes, if I water fasted, I'd get probably more benefit. But I can, work out in the morning, see, 7-8 hours of patients, go to dance class in the evening, and have lots of energy. And my ketone levels will actually get really high. When I fast, just water, my ketone levels are, of course, in the nutritional ketosis range, but they drop down to 5. Because I did fat fasting for a few days. Ketone levels were close to 7. And then when I fasted at the end of the week, they dropped down to low 5s because ketones require energy to be produced. Your body does have to use energy to make ketones. And if your body thinks you're starving or fasting and there's no food, they're going to shut down excessive ketone production because it has to save energy. Now, my cancer patients, I have them do a modified water fast, which is I allow them some coconut oil or macadamia nuts or olive oil with their clear broths and organic liquids because many cancer patients are very pre-diabetic or diabetic, and they are insulin resistant, and it will take days to get their glucose levels down to where I want to start them, because I like to bring their levels down to 65, their glucose levels, before I start implementing their macronutrient parameters. But like based on what their lean weight should be, I figure out how much of this and that they should eat. Macronutrients for the public, which is, how many grams of carbs, how many grams of protein, how many grams of fat. For a lot of patients, fasting is easier than having to cut back. It really is.
And what about the people that want to live every minute to the fullest, like you?
Right.
You'll work all day, you'll go dance, you'll exercise, you'll spend all that time with your family, you'll cook the most amazing foods I've ever heard of. What about, and you look, by the way,
Thank you.
You're just defying age. Your body fats, what is your body fat?
My body fat percentage is 13
point something.
Right.
And
and let's face it, I'm old, say it. I know you want to.
No.
I'm chronologically up there.
But biologically, it's like not even hitting you.
No,
you're
biologically,
defying,
for sure. Right.
you are truly defying age.
Right.
So what about the people that just want to defy age and have all that energy? What do you recommend?
If they don't have a lot of issues with food addiction, then they can, and I don't recommend going slowly into it, because you can't just start cutting it back a little bit when you're not fat adapted. That does not work. You don't feel well, and that fat adaptation phase can be really bad. So what you want to do is get your fat levels up right away. And sometimes, a fat fast for a few days with a lot of fluid helps. It really helps in that period. And maybe they have a day or two of feeling a little weak, but once that second day is over, they're like, wow, I wasn't even hungry. I felt great. I felt energetic. There are some people who can just start the next day with their macronutrient parameters and they're fine. But a lot of people who do that feel like they get what they call the keto flu, which is really when you're not truly fat adapted yet. And your brain just isn't getting enough fuel yet. And the other thing it can be for many people is, you don't hold on to fluid the same way. You don't hold on to water. You don't swell. You don't become edematous. You need more salt. Like, you need to go out of your way and eat salt when you're in keto. And some people need up to 10 times the amount of magnesium. So magnesium can become a big, like, you can find yourself cramping, getting muscle cramps. And that says that you need magnesium and maybe some more potassium, but you'd certainly need more salts. And that's pretty across the board. So I tell patients, I know you're not used to eating all the salt, but like, if you're feeling weak, a few days into it, get some big, real pickles, like the real fermented live pickles, and just eat pickles. Eat a big fat pickle, or buy some fresh, some real olives that are, they're not canned, they're not pasteurized. Get some real live fermented or cultured stuff that has salt, and just go to town. Get some sauerkraut, live sauerkraut, and add that to your salad. And some people don't like that stuff, but that's few. Most people love pickles,
Absolutely.
And olives and things like
you're
that.
cheating and you're eating all the most delicious foods.
Right.
What about putting salt on your food? What kind of salt would we put on our foods?
So I always recommend a salt that has nutrients, minerals. So pink Himalayan salt is good. You can get some of the black lava salt, or there's black salt from France.
So what about caffeine? How does caffeine play into all of this?
Yes, and everyone's different, but we also know that caffeine from coffee, from black tea, from chocolate can stimulate stress hormones. And there are people like me who have variances with COMT that don't degrade our caffeine, evenly to epinephrine and norepinephrine, and so we get more of a stress response. And if you get a stress response, you're going to get cortisol, and that's going to elevate your glucose level. And so it can be an obstacle to getting into ketosis or lowering your blood glucose.
You talk about protein, and I love that you're bringing the plant-based keto sort of to the forefront. What are your thoughts around how much protein we need? Because a lot of times I see, and even myself, when I'm focusing on high fat and I'm in a state of ketosis, it's very easy to fall into high protein as well.
Oh, yeah. People say, I crave protein. Well, you crave protein because you're on the glucose merry-go-round.
Right.
And a lot of the protein most people eat throughout the day is converted to glucose. But most people who eat like a 6-ounce or an 8-ounce piece of fish or steak, probably almost half of that protein is being converted to glucose. But I work with athletes, and I work with cancer patients, and I work with people who just want to do this for health. Athletes for sure. Like, I get these guys in there, they think they're eating like 220 grams of protein, and they really only need 90 grams, a lot of these guys. And what I do is I look at the lean weight, And so if somebody is 180 pounds, but they should be 140, then I take the 140 and I divide that by 2.2, and that's their weight in kilos, and that's really their max protein. People that have a lot of cortisol and stress hormone have a certain body habitus, and that is usually not a lot of muscle in their arms and legs, but a big fat belly, or even just like, not even so big, but just like a belly. And they're muscle wasters. When you're a fat burner, you're not a muscle waster, because even a thin athlete has 40,000 calories of fat stored. Well, unless you're emaciated,
Right.
there's always fats to pull. And so your body's preferentially going to go right to the fat, the fatty tissue in the muscles, and start converting that into ketones for the brain and the heart.
So this concern around muscle wasting and losing muscle when you're on a ketogenic diet.
I've gained muscle. I'm up there in my years and female, so I do body weight. And I box, but I do yoga and dance and stuff. So I do all kinds of stuff and swim. I'm not doing what people think of as like, building muscle mass. And I gained weight and lost body fat, right? So if you gain weight and lose body fat percentage, you've put on muscle mass. So that's how it should be. And so I do it on very little protein, 40 to 50 grams.
And where do you get your protein from? Where do you like to get your protein from?
Cruciferous vegetables.
Yes. So which are your favorite?
Brussels sprouts and broccoli and kale and collards, but I grow them all for their greens. So my Brussels sprouts, broccoli, I keep cutting those off just to get more greens. Cruciferous is 20 grams of protein for 200 calories.
Wow.
So it's more protein per calorie than meat. But there's some carbs, so not much, because it's a lot of fiber, and when you're looking at carbs and fiber, you subtract the fiber, and then that number is your net carb. But I love cauliflower. We do a lot with cauliflower. I rice it and put pesto on it, and it's a lot of protein. You don't need much else. But I always eat like almond butter. I know I shouldn't be eating peanut butter because of the whole aflatoxin issue, but I love peanut butter. I really do. I really love it. But I love almond butter and pecan butter and macadamias and hemp seeds, and I'll make like a hemp seed. If I'm going to eat something for brunch and I want something more substantial, I'll make either a chia seed pudding or what I call like a mock oatmeal, which is a lot of hemp seeds and coconut milk with cinnamon or raw vanilla, and and that's pretty proteinous. I mean, hemp seeds are very high protein. I certainly tell people you can't do corn, soy, canola, cottonseed oil. Even if they're non-GMO, they're loaded with pesticides.
So you're taking your protein from what sounds and is some of the most delicious foods
I
out
think
there.
so too. I mean,
no
I do.
question about
Right,
it.
Right.
What do you do with avocados? Like, do you eat them each and every day? 'Cause
I
there's
do.
so-
Well, yes. So I mash avocados with olive oil and lime juice and salt, and that's like a green goddess dressing that we use in our house a lot. I put avocado on a lot of salad. If I'm hungry and I don't have a lot of time, I'll cut open an avocado and put salt and just eat half an avocado. That's like a great snack. So they're just always in our house. But you also need saturated fat. I don't eat animal. So I go out of my way for coconut oil
Right.
but I eat red palm oil every day. I eat coconut oil every day. I love cocoa butter. Like if I'm making fat bombs, I love using the cocoa butter. And so I am getting saturated fats. You need them. So it's all a balance, I mean, I get a lot of monounsaturates, my avocado and nuts and olive oil, and then I get my saturates. If you want to really look at it, animal protein stimulates insulin, and plant-based protein really doesn't. And so if you look at a graph of like which foods, stimulate the most insulin, I mean, even fish, you eat fish and it's going to stimulate a lot more insulin than if you ate peanut butter, or the same amount of protein in cruciferous grains. So it's interesting because people don't realize, and I didn't realize that. I just thought protein didn't stimulate insulin, but it does. And animal protein stimulates a lot more insulin than plant-based protein. It barely stimulates any insulin. So my patients that are insulin resistant and having a hard time getting into keto, I tell them it's really important you stay plant-based because we have to stop that insulin merry-go-round. Like that's the number one thing we have to reduce. But it's easier to say, okay, this quarter of the year, I'm going to do ketosis, or I'm going to do plant-based ketosis, or I'm going to do, whatever. But I'm going to try to stay in ketosis to get rid of any cancer burden, that any circulating cells that are cancer. You can have cancer cells that have like genetic defects, which is a byproduct of this metabolic disorder. And if you have healthy mitochondria, they're not going to be able to do anything. And we know that from studies, from transplants, right? So it's harder to have those cancer cells stick if your mitochondria are healthy. So if you do ketosis for a few months out of the year, you get your mitochondria in really good shape. And so even if there were some, dormant cells somewhere in the back of your little toe, under your nail, I mean, I don't know where they sit, but they're somewhere. They can't take hold anywhere because your mitochondria now are respiring well. You can create new mitochondria by fasting and being in ketosis. You create new mitochondria by going into cold water immersion. By intensive exercising. All these things stimulate new mitochondria and make your old mitochondria healthier. They have better respiration. So if you can do that for a few months out of the year, you're going to keep your mitochondria in better shape than somebody who doesn't do that. And it's going to be easier for you to do it than trying to go in and out all the time. But one other thing we didn't talk about, which is brown fat.
Let's talk about it. Because
the more you expose yourself to the cold, the better mitochondria
Yes.
function that you have. But when you immerse yourself in cold water and expose yourself to cold water, you develop brown fat, which we used to think was only a thing of babies and hibernating mammals. So I do this breath work, and I sit outside in the cold in my bathing suit or shorts, and I'm warm, and I submerge myself in cold water in the lake because
white fat, brown fat.
So brown fat.
So let's talk
I'm
about
building
both.
brown fat.
Right.
Every time I do this. And the brown fat sits weird. It sits on the clavicles and in the back.
And why do we care about it?
We
What
care
makes
about
it
it
special?
because when you are exposed to cold, it immediately becomes active, takes your white fat, and creates heat. It's really smart fat. It's not taking cholesterol and making hormones. It's not doing all these other things that can disrupt our system. We're meant to be stressing our systems and exposing ourselves to the heat, to the cold, to fasting, or not having enough food or calories a few days out of the month or the year. Healthy people have brown fat, and healthy people are fat adapted.
And we activate more brown fat by
exposing ourselves to the cold and cold water. So even just doing your breath work, like I do breath work and meditation outside all winter long. So people who are big proponents of cold water therapy say the best thing you can do for your mitochondria is cold water, and the proponents of ketosis say the best thing you can do for your mitochondria is ketosis. But why not do both?
Yeah.
But it's the population saying, I don't want to get cancer. I don't want to get sick. I'm going to biohack. I'm going to find the fastest way to reversing any disease process and also to making myself the next level health. And I'm not going to count on my doctor because I can't count on my doctor to give me that information. This is stuff you do yourself.
Right.
You have to do the work. Like anything else. This isn't about going to your doctor and getting, I'm going to take this supplement or this new pill to turn this on.
You are a fascinating and brilliant woman, and it's been such an incredible honor to learn from you, to hear from you, to look at you and see that you're the billboard for everything that you are talking about. It's just remarkable. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I'm excited about this film. It should be really cool.
What an amazing story. And she's in her late 50s. Is that right?
She's younger than you.
Yeah, she's a little younger than me.
But what's also unbelievable is when Oprah wrote about her, right in that story, you see her on a trapeze, moving. This woman has the vitality of no one I've ever seen. And it's all because of the things that she's been doing in her life.
And it shows that when you put the effort in,
Yeah.
it pays off.